Okay, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. Before we get started with today's webinar, we have some housekeeping items and some announcements to make you aware of. My name is Paulette Wallace and I am a member of our Common Dignity, the Rights-Based Approaches Working Group, and here are some initial messages. Okay. So please enter your full name so that we know who you are, and we would love to have your questions and comments. So please feel free to type these into the Zoom chat in the language that is most comfortable for you. So the webinar today, in all of our presentations, you will see French, English, and Spanish text in the background of the PowerPoints. Now there will be time at the end of the webinar for addressing questions and comments, and we hope to also have other question opportunities as time allows us. Please note that all questions and comments from today's webinar will be collated by the Our Common Dignity Rights-Based Approaches Working Group. Please note that this webinar is being broadcast live on the ICOMOS International Facebook page and video recorded to be made available on the ICOMOS YouTube and social media channels after the event. Now, we want to know what you thought about our webinar, so we encourage everyone to please take the time at the end of our webinar to answer our exit poll. Now, there are a few questions there and we would love to receive your feedback because it helps us to build and make our webinars better, more innovative, and just to change things up. As we all know, we've attended a lot of webinars over the last 15 months. And you go in the draw to win a book. So we have a fantastic book, People-Centered Methodologies for Heritage Conservation, to give away. So if you take the time to fill in our exit poll at the end of this webinar, which will come up when you exit the webinar today, if you fill that out, then you go in the draw to win this fantastic new book coming out, which will also be a topic of our webinar we have coming up in July. And now I would like to introduce Ava Paulus to provide a rundown on the agenda today and to welcome everyone. Thank you.
Dear everyone, I'm so glad that so many of us of ICOMOS, our Common Dignity Working Group members, are in this webinar speaking and presenting, as well as Teresa Patricia, ICOMOS President. I welcome you all. I am chairing the first part of the webinar from 12 to 1 Paris time, and then my dear colleague Neil Kamal will take over. So my main function today is to look at the clock and say 1 minute for conclusions. From 12 to 12:05 we have some small introduction. Then Adriana Careaga and Alicia Castillo will talk about the idea of our webinar series. 12:15 to 12:30, Bente Matisse and the focal point of our Common Dignity Working Group will talk about news. 12:30 to 12:45, ICOMOS President Teresa Patricia is going to speak, and 12:45 to 1 hour, we are going to speak about ICOMOS people-centered resolution. Then we have a small roundtable with 2 case studies presented by our colleagues. And let me introduce all the panelists from the start. Can you, Paulette, show our panelists from the start? Yes, thank you. Alicia Castillo is professor in cultural heritage management in the University of Madrid. and longtime former president of ICOMOS Spain. Yeah? Adriana Careaga is current president of Uruguay ICOMOS and board member of ICOMOS and heritage and education specialist. I am president of ICOMOS Estonia and very active member of our Common Dignity Rights-Based Approach Working Group, as well as was connected with people-centered resolution. Teresa Patricia is ICOMOS president, ICOMOS former president of ICOMOS Belgium, architect. Next slide, please. The dignified people continue. Bente is our soul and heart. ICOMOS, our Common Dignity Rights-Based Approaches Working Group focal point. Gronia Sheffrey is ICOMOS board member and president of ICOMOS Ireland. Benedict Slelvshag, former rapporteur of the World Heritage Committee, former ICOMOS Secretary General. And Neil Kamal Champagne, ICOMOS Nepal, director of the Center of the Heritage Management in Ahmedabad University, India. And we have a lot of colleagues helping with our webinar series. Let me introduce them briefly as well. Paulette Wallis, our good guidance and who takes care of all the communication, heritage facilitator who loves cultural landscapes, and from New Zealand and currently in Germany. Laura Marique, heritage practitioners and member of ICOMOS Emerging Professional Working Group. Valentine Nebon-Karl, heritage practitioner and completed PhD in Chinese and heritage studies. And Graciela Mota, professor in heritage and social change focused on heritage management and governance. And Mohamed Badri, Heritage for All initiative founder, and Andrea Martinez Fernandez, emerging heritage professional interested in meaning-making processes, archaeologists in Spain. So very dignified company, a lot of listeners, I hope, a lot of interesting discussions and presentations, I hope, and I will give a word now to Alicia and Adriana, my dear colleagues. Floor is yours.
Okay, Alicia.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to introduce this important webinar for us, for our working group. I would like to say thank you every member, especially Paulette for the support, and of course my colleague and co-organizer, Adriana and Aben, of course our president, to be here today with us, to encourage to look for a good success for this initiative. Concerning the series of webinars, our main objective is to try to show more about heritage-based approaches. And we are preparing a program that the last Saturdays of each month during the next month until January, we have introduced several webinars. The structure of each webinar is in three main parts. One of them is about news and, different activities that the working group has made or will be made. And a second part is focused on involved people and other managers, friends of another organization, etc., that would like to share with us initiatives concerning the topic of the specific webinar. And finally, we have an interesting roundtable that tries to deep in the topic, the specific topic, with expert managers and another member of ICOMOS and another organizations that try to speak with a little about the topic. Besides, our objective is to improve the initiative step by step. No, concerning finish the webinar, we have prepared a survey that try to look for the thoughts, the opinion and comment of the participants, with the idea to collect information and to improve the next webinar. And I think the important here is to hear the rest of the speaker today, and at the same time to introduce our next webinar, that is about the important topic of gender and cultural heritage, where we will try to introduce important thing about the rights, about the alternative narrative and inclusive narrative, and of course the empowerment of the women in the context of cultural heritage management. And nothing else now. I think Adriana can introduce something more important that about the webinar.
The very important things. Just hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. Special thanks to our President, Teresa, for giving us the time and the support to be here, and to our group, and that we work hard for this. Just one reflection, just one thought, that this is a transdisciplinary group. We are more than 60 people, and we face this webinar, this Jueves del Patrimonio, or Heritage Thursday, as a transdisciplinary theme, transdisciplinary and transculture group. And we honor multilingualism, we honor diversity, because we think that human rights approaches and heritage are very important to hear all the voices. That's what we thought. This could act as an agora in the Greek, in the ancient Greek, to discuss all the subjects about heritage and human rights, that all over the world can say what is going on. So for us, we are very, very happy to have this today, and we started. So thank you very much. Ave, you go. Thank you.
Thank you, dear coordinators and colleagues, so much. We go further now. Bente Mathisen, ICOMOS Our Common Dignity Working Group Focal Point, ICOMOS Norway, floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll try to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
But we see not slide PowerPoint, but all your screen.
All your screen, and I will change.
Yeah.
Is that
excellent.
okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Then I will introduce you to our working group. Dear all, I hope that we will get inputs from you in the end, because as Adriana and Alicia said, we are an inclusive working group. We started in 2011, and our Common Dignity Right-Based Approaches Working Group, we aim at exploring right issues in heritage management. As Adriana said, we like to explore the diversity of ICOMOS and their diversity of rights-based approaches. We do not talk about right-based approach, but approaches. As the approaches need to be adapted locally to the national committees, the scope of the international committees, the people involved. And we are aiming at integrating right-based approaches in all aspects of ICOMOS work. So what is our Common Dignity Right-Based Approaches? We're a working group made up by ICOMOS members, and we have observers from IUCN and ICRAM. Some have asked to be members, and we answered that provided you're not an ICOMOS member, we might open up for observers. Our Common Dignity Initiative started in 2011 when ICOMOS Norway invited ICOMOS, IUCN and ICROM to form the Our Common Dignity Initiative with the aim of working towards rights-based approaches in World Heritage Management. And what is RBA? We seek to integrate right norms, standards and principles into policy, planning and implementation outcomes assessment in order to help assure wherever possible that practices respects and supports rights. And our work in ICOMOS, as in the UN family, is based on Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So a human right-based approaches might offer standards for processes, for example, consultations, definitions, and then we have definitions of duty bearers and right holders, which is different from stakeholders. And I like to rest a little bit there, but because the term right holders might be similar to stakeholders. Stakeholder, which normally is understood as an involved or an actor with an interest in something. But the right holders implies that there is a contract-like or reciprocal element in their relationship, which is not always the situation with a stakeholder. Rights holders can be individuals, they can be groups of different kinds, and formed on the basis of different interests or external characteristics, and they can be interested organizations and NGOs. So that implies that it is an approach where we look at entitlements and responsibility. And we as ICOMOS members often work with the responsible part with the state party, the duty bearer. The approach have a coverage of consider a coverage of individual and collective rights, coverage of substantial and procedural rights, and is a central method to work with marginalized and vulnerable groups in heritage actions. We are now celebrating 2021, 10 years of work on the working group. And our main achievements has been these 5 topics, which you might see on the screen. We have worked through a policy change with integrating human rights-based approaches into ICOMOS works, and we are happy to see that we are now one of the working groups which are asked to contribute to different consultations of ICOMOS. And the 60 members of our group represent a diversity of expertise which enable us to answer. We have put great focus on the dialogue with the 3AB cooperation with the ICOMOS and IUCN. In collaboration on cross-cutting topics, promoting right-based approaches. And we have learned a lot from IUCN and ICROM, and I also hope that they might say that they have learned something from us. Capacity building is a core concern for us. We started the first training in 2016, and we have annually capacity building to build know-how of World Heritage managers and right holders, how to cooperate, how to work with rights-based approaches. A main milestone has been the review of the operational guidelines in July 2019 by the World Heritage Committee in Baku. Rights has been now, or it was included then in 2019, in the operational guideline Part B, Article 12, 14, 64, 111, and 117. And local communities are included in several paragraphs. And the operational guidelines encourage state parties to include right-based approaches in their work. Another important milestone is the Buenos Aires Declaration, celebrating the 17th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where ICOMOS commits itself to follow up the declaration in current work. So, coming back to 10 years, what is the actual situation? We hold monthly working group meeting, which are virtual, and they have been virtual for the last 3 years. So when COVID-19 struck, we already had a routine of meeting every month, and started with a COVID-19 statement last year. It was a very active 2020. The main activities in 2021 is launch of Heritage Thursday, this one being the first. Responses to current consultation concerning cultural heritage and rights. Monthly, we receive one or two requests to comment on policy documents. The last one being on gender, together with a sustainable development working group. Right-based approaches training and workshops. We have collaborated now with different professionals and human rights experts on right-based approaches, and have had since 2016 about 10 trainings and workshops. And we might help you in approaching the topic with through our network. But the host of these trainings are always the host country, the national committee, and it is the responsibility of the national committee to raise funds together with us for the training. So we have no budget at all. We totally depend on the national committees, the international scientific committees, and the individual members to work out our working plan. We made after the GA in 2020, on the request of the scientific symposium and the review of the Eggersian principle, bylaws for our working group, which are being submitted to the board for consideration and possibly approval in 2022. While national committees and international scientific committees have rules of procedure which need to be followed, the working groups, the character of the working groups are that we are free to work on important topics. And for us, it is the rights-based approaches and the rights, and to explore rights issues in the global community that ICOMOS is made up by. In 2021, the scientific symposium should have been in the autumn in Thailand, but due to COVID-19, it will be virtual. It will be in November. And we are one of 3 organizing committees for the scientific symposium to 2021. And there has been a call for papers, and there still is possible to present papers. So please look it up on the ICOMOS webpage. So examples of, I will finish with examples of our activities. In April 2021, then we saw one of our members. It's typical how things happen. One of our members, Benedicte, noticed a call from the International Criminal Court on a consultation for a draft policy of a cultural heritage. And we, together with ICOMOS President Teresa Patriciu and the Bureau and the international scientific committees and national committees, we managed to put up a draft which was finally adopted by Teresa and sent to the International Criminal Court, and where we offer to work with the International Criminal Court in what we may do to support their work. That is documentation of damage or cases where the International Criminal Court might have a case where cultural heritage is involved. And that will probably be a topic of one of our future Heritage Thursday, because we got a lot of also individual inputs on that from eCorp, which was not possible to include in the comments. So this is the kind of nature how we work. Launch of Heritage Thursdays today, June 2021. Some of the members, we have presented a paper on the doctrinal text for the Theophilus conference that should be in Italy in June, which is now postponed to September. In September, there will be a national training, not an international right-based approaches training, and this time for Norwegian World Heritage coordinators. And one event that will need to be worked on for our working group is the Living Heritage and Climate Change International Symposium in 2021. So to sum up, it is a diversity of activities, and we depend on active members willing to work on current topics. And it is has for me been a great learning to work with the working group, and I assume that the others might confirm that. So please, if you're interested in join the group, look us up on the ICOMOS website, contact us, and we are open for more ICOMOS members. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bent, for your energy to deal with more simple problems as well as with very serious ones. Are there any, Paulette, are there any questions, small questions, or not yet?
Not just yet, but we will continue to collect them for the rest of the session. So we can keep moving, I think.
Yes, thank you again, Bent. Now we are very honored to welcome Teresa Patricia, ICOMOS President, Architect, Master in Heritage Conservation, Doctor in Engineering, Independent Consultant, Expert on Management and Conservation of Archaeological Sites, Professor at Lamar International Center of Conservation, Senior Expert for Heritage Programs of the European Union, Senior Expert for the World Heritage Sites of Baalbek and Tyre, Lebanon, former President of ICOMOS Belgium and former President of ICOMOS Wallonia Brussels, expert member of formation, member of the Working Group for the Safeguarding of the Cultural Heritage in Syria and Iraq, Administration Board member of the Belgian Blue Shield. Floor is yours, Teresa.
Thank you so much. I hope you are hearing me. Perhaps before starting, are you sharing my PowerPoint or should I do it?
I have it here.
Okay, thank you so much. So thank you so much, Ava, for introducing me. And first of all, of course, I want to congratulate our Common Dignity Right-Based Approach Working Group of ICOMOS for organizing this initiative. And of course, also, I congratulate you for your 10th anniversary that I think you are also commemorating today. It's wonderful. The launching of this webinar series, these Heritage Thursdays focused on people-centered approach, is of great importance, of course, in the context of today's societies, especially if we think, if you take into account the increasing risks and threats that heritage and communities are facing today and in a daily basis, as climate change, human-made and natural disasters, armed conflicts. This unhappily, our last decade was, we were confronted with a lot of armed conflicts. But before going straight to the subject of today, perhaps allow me to give a few indications about ICOMOS as organization. So we are a network of experts specialized in a large range of disciplines. ICOMOS is the only global non-governmental organization of this kind, which is dedicated to promote the application of theories, methodologies, and scientific techniques to the conservation and protection of cultural heritage. So in ICOMOS, we have around 11,000 members all over the world in 151 countries. We are organized, of course, by national committees. We have also 28 international scientific committees and working groups working on a large variety of subjects. We have so a very rich mix of disciplines. ICOMOS benefits from the interdisciplinary exchanges of our members, serving the cultural heritage community in the international level and also in a voluntary basis. ICOMOS is one of the 3 advisory bodies of the World Heritage Committee for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention of UNESCO. The others being UCN, of course, more related with the natural site. Please, I will tell you when we pass the slides, if you can stay with the first one. Thank you. Thank you very much. The first one. So as I was telling, so we are, as advisory body of UNESCO, of course, ICOMOS reviews the nominations of cultural world heritage, give advice, and of course ensures the conservation status of the properties. So now the first slide, can we have the next one? So ICOMOS has gradually built the philosophical and doctrinal framework of heritage on an international level. And we are running programs and projects out of the year. There are also a large amount of partnerships that ICOMOS share with our national committees, international scientific committees, and working groups. ICOMOS founding principle stated by the Venice Charter in '64 is our common responsibility to safeguard cultural heritage for future generations. The sensitivity and the spirit of this principle is focused on ever more and more complex and nuanced issues. The time seems to have come to re-examine our principles in order to deepen and broaden its scope in new documents and actions. So discussion about human rights in past and present generations has been difficult. Inclusion of communities in the day-by-day decision making has often been denied or considered as a constraint for development and management by stakeholders. But of course, history teaches a plurality of attitudes in relation to our history, to the history of our countries and regions, as well in relation to the evolution of concepts and theories. And the concept of built cultural heritage has been subject also to a constant evolution, from individual monuments and archaeological sites to historic urban areas, rural settlements and cultural landscapes. The relationships between the immovable and movable heritage have been refined. Cultural heritage become also inseparable with the notions of development and economics of a particular region. Links have been strengthened between the cultural and natural heritage, and monuments and sites have been associated with intangible cultural heritage, traditional craftsmanship, and traditional knowledge systems. Today, we all recognize the interconnected nature of tangible and intangible cultural values. If we have accepted this close relationship between tangible and intangible heritage, then we have the obligation and duty to extend our heritage theories, practices, and preservation and management policies to the respect and protection of communities, to the preservation of their customs, beliefs, and lifestyles, safeguarding communities that assign meaning to buildings, to sites, to places, to land rights, and land uses. Next slide, please. Cultural heritage protection, thank you. So cultural heritage protection is not anymore about safeguarding monuments and sites. is also about preserving communities and the things that people cherish and identify as part of their cultural identity. So the work developed by our Common Dignity Right-Based Approaches, the working group, is undoubtedly of great importance to ICOMOS to help us to understand the today dimension of heritage and how can we preserve community values and rights of different communities to future generations. Right-based approach intersect with the study areas of many ICOMOS international scientific committees, such as those for intangible heritage, places of religion and ritual, vernacular architecture, tourism, heritage interpretation and presentation, but also with our working groups as the one of Sustainable Development Goals, Indigenous Heritage Working Group, Climate Change and Heritage, Iraq-Syria Working Group. So right-based approaches is an extremely important issue for ICOMOS, and we are in the process of developing relevant policies and strategies focusing on respect for local communities, on rights, developing best practices and ethics, integrating human rights in the heritage management among conservators, public and private sector, academicians, among all the involved stakeholders. So to give you an idea of a few documents, and Bente just before me, she already spoke of the most important ones, but anyway, I'd like to pass through it. We have, of course, in ICOMOS, we had already, I think, 4 resolutions approved by our general assemblies about right-based approaches. We had in 2011. Can I have next slide, please? We had in 2011, 2014, 2017, and the last one during the ICOMOS General Assembly in 2020. At this key moment in time as ICOMOS consider its work in close conjunction with the UN 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals. And while the global crisis of COVID-19 has highlighted the vulnerability of human contacts and access to places. We had, of course, very important declarations, right-based approach related. They were also adopted. And to give you a few insights, we had in 1998, we had already the Stockholm Declaration that was marking the 5th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But in 2017, so we had the Delhi Declaration on Heritage and Democracy that states in its first article number 1, manage heritage resources of our common future, respecting values, significance and authenticity. And for me, this shows already that the concept of heritage has widened considerably. And can I have next slide, please? And in 2018, the ICOMOS Buenos Aires Declaration, of course, marking the 7th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that encourage ICOMOS members to build strong relationships with communities, embracing the principle of free and informed consent of communities before adopting measures concerning their specific cultural heritage. And of course, respecting that communities be consulted and invited to actively participate in the whole process of preservation and safeguarding of cultural heritage. Next slide, please. More recently, the Heritage and Sustainable Development Goals, policy guidance for heritage and development actors. This new policy document that is in the right side of your slide, produced by the Sustainable Development Goals Working Group, and that was launched just now in March 2021. This document aims to demonstrate the potential of harnessing heritage to assist in achieving sustainable development and acknowledge the potential impact of heritage as a lever for implementing human rights. So ICOMOS theory and practices as well in the cultural heritage sector in general is evolving in line with the global discourse of sustainable development. So more participatory, more inclusive, more people-centered approaches, community-based. Acknowledging that rights issues, including the involvement of communities, are growing, a growing aspect of the work of International Organization for Cultural and Heritage. ICOMOS, in its role of advisory body of the World Heritage Committee of UNESCO, has also taken important initiatives over the last decade. To give you a few ones, so in between 2011 and 2016, our Common Dignity initiative under the coordination of ICOMOS Norway National Committee has brought together the work of the three advisory bodies to the World Heritage Convention, so ICOMOS with IUCN and ICROM. So the final report summarizes the work undertaken to raise awareness about the significance of right-based approaches in the World Heritage context. And of course, more recently, and can I have the next slide? And Bente also already make a reference to that. During the World Heritage Committee in Baku in July 2019, the advisory bodies participate on the review of the operational guidelines for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention. So rights had been included in the operational guidelines. And of course, as Bente also told, local communities are also included in several paragraphs. So as advisory body, ICOMOS reviews the nominations of cultural world heritage. And for this work, ICOMOS, of course, relies on our World Heritage Unities, Secretariat, and of course, on our international network of experts. For the last decade, we are also trying to improve the representativeness of our experts, of course, by their expertise and experience, and in accordance with clear ethical rules, but also we are really trying to improve the gender equality and providing balanced regional representation. We have been working to embrace inclusiveness, and therefore also this approach is being taken also to all our governance bodies. Can I have next slide, please? To conclude, and perhaps as a hint for the next webinar that is programmed end of June, I'd like to talk to you also on the occasion at the European Development Day in 2018, organized by the European Commission in Brussels. ICOMOS, together with other organizations, was part of 2018 Brussels Declaration, strengthen the synergies on gender and culture for the development and international cooperation, which acknowledge the essential role that women play in the intergenerational transmission and renewal of many forms of intangible cultural heritage in local context, as well in the promotion of cultural diversity. This Brussels Declaration of 2018 called on local governments and cities to be more engaged with women on cultural activities using a gendered lens and ensuring equal access for all. So, right-based approach for heritage, gender issues, exploring emotional attachments to historic urban places, trauma and heritage, living heritage and climate changes. These are really topics that are fundamental and are topics that will be discussed during the cycle of Heritage Thursdays, right-based approaches, organized by the ICOMOS Working Group. And I really congratulate you for the organization of these webinars. The proposed topics in the program are a strong signal that several constructive ideas will be put forward. And so in name of ICOMOS, I wish you to all a very fruitful and constructive debate. And thank you so much for inviting me here today. And thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the very deep and thorough understanding of the issues and support for the ideas, and it was really very informative and deep speech. So thank you again. And we are glad that you had time from your schedule to join us for at least these 15 minutes. So thank you again. And we proceed with 2020 resolution on people-centered approaches to cultural heritage. Bente Mathiesen, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Then I share your screen and I will put full page. Because what we want to do now is to look into the last resolution, which Patricia mentioned. And thank you very much, Patricia. It is wonderful to see when what we have been worked so hard on is taken on by others and presented by others like you do. And especially we like I said, or we feel that we had done something important when we see that others take on our ideas and develop them and express them in another or in a common context. So thank you very much for that. The people-centered approaches has been for a long time an issue, not for the 3 ABs of to the World Heritage Convention. And for ICOMOS, this is the first time we have it as a resolution. And the ones who will present this are Ava and me. And Ava, you did the difficult work of contacting everybody. So please comment the first slide here.
I'm sorry. So first slide is actually when you can see, maybe ICOMOS resolution is very simple as Buenos Aires Declaration, four points, but the signatures, there are more than 2 pages of signatures, and we are very honored that actually this resolution came right in time of COVID and climate emergency and all these very, very serious problems that deal with heritage communities and existence of cultural diversity as well as biodiversity is under threat now. So that's why I think that everybody was not only signing the document, but participating in making it. We did it in Google Docs, and really those people who have signed the documents and those working groups and those scientific committees and national committees, they really looked at the document and made some comments and improvements there as well. Of course, we thank very much Christoph River, Benedict Selflag, Ege Yildirim, Stacey Wallis, Andrew Potts, Diana Archibald, Maya Ishizawa, Paloma Guzman, Gronia Sheffrey, Deidre McDermott, Sheridan Burke, Ilaria Rossetti and Laura Maric for making it all together, but there are 88 individual supporters and 5 committees and 10 national committees and some international committees. So we really it was a really huge collaborative work, and not only in paper but in reality. So when Bente saw how many comments have been there in Google Docs made, then at a certain moment she was a bit worried, but it went well. So floor is to you again, Bente.
Yes, thank you very much, Ave. Then it is always a challenge when you are cooperating with that many people, and you're standing on the shoulder of so many experienced colleagues, how to summarize and to have a consensus of something that is viable and simple. And this resolution is fairly simple. We're standing on the shoulders of many, and I didn't mention in my introduction Amund Stenig Larsen. He was the founder of a common dignity initiative. It would not have been possible with his network to come where we have come. So this kind of work is It's both the individuals and the group and the collective work that enable us to have results. So that is why the ICOMOS adopted this resolution, where we say that we resolve to support and seek to expand continued cooperation of international scientific committees, working groups, and national committees. The three main forums for work in ICOMOS in relation to the shared objective of sustainable development, climate change action, cultural diversity, human rights-based approaches, and the diverse forms of indigenous cultural heritage. Further, in this cooperation, integrate the focus of that cooperation into ICOMOS as a working method, theoretical and conceptual frameworks, as well as in its institutional operations and best practices in a coordinated, collaborative, intergenerational and transversal manner. Right-based approaches is about diversity, so we try to live that in our cooperation with the other working groups and with our colleagues and with you. And ICOMOS, standing on the shoulders of IOC and ICROM with the people-centered approaches, the connection of people with heritage and places, which is a long journey also for IUCN, recognizing the people of the natural sites, with intercultural dialogue and understanding, sustainability and well-being when addressing local, national and international heritage policies and practice. This diversity will better realize the full potential of cultural heritage to deliver climate resilient pathways, to strengthen sustainable development while promoting a just transition to low carbon futures. So you see here how we try to synthesize the main concerns of ICOMOS, building on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, considering Agenda 2030, considering the climate change working group and all the last work on that. And of course, building on the World Heritage Convention and recognizing ICOMOS leadership in cultural heritage. And not the least, honor heritage communities and individual rights, taking into consideration past and future generations, acknowledge their role in developing and implementing resilient strategies in a rapidly changing world, and assist. We, ICOMOS, offer to assist authorities to empower citizens to maintain and develop their values and their livelihoods in a dignified, responsible, and sustainable manner. We work according to our Common Dignity initiative. And when starting, it was very controversial to talk about human rights. And that was why dignity was an umbrella that everybody could adopt, and an umbrella that enable us to accept the diversity of ICOMOS memberships and considerations. And not the last point is to work to sustainably synergize cultural heritage conservation and management with the diverse culture, environmental, and socioeconomic concerns of people and communities through building partnership with relevant sectors, such as social and health services, culture and creative industries, nature and biodiversity conservation, tourism, urban and territorial planning and development, and infrastructure in energy provision. The working groups have cooperated in several responses to UN special rapporteurs' calls for inputs that are specifically and lastly in 2020 with the culture with a special rapporteur on culture, on climate change, and also on sustainable development and COVID-19. So we have followed up after November 2020, and we'll continue to follow up. So this is synergized. This is what we had a consensus on, and what we simply hope that will be further explored today and in the further cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bent. Just briefly to say that our main work is to advocate the resilience and creativity embedded in the culture and heritage of local communities, and how this knowledge gives all of the society hope for the future. As pointed out in People-Centered Approaches, the resolution adopted in 2020, we promote the connections of people with heritage and places, intercultural dialogue and understanding, sustainability and well-being when addressing local, national and international heritage policies and practice. And we really do believe that this will better realize the full potential of cultural heritage to deliver climate resilient pathways to strengthen sustainable development while promoting a just transition to low carbon futures. And such very strong words are written in these 4 points of this resolution. So we really think that it is worthwhile taking a series of webinars. So, but now, Paulette, are there any questions? We have 4 minutes before our roundtable session. Or comments, or can you?
We haven't received any comments from our audience, so do please feel free to put any comments into or questions into the Zoom chat, and we have time to answer them after the roundtable.
Okay, thank you again, Bente. And then 1 hour has passed quickly. I will give floor to Neil, who is our next chair.
Thank you, Ave. Greetings, everybody. Greetings from Nepal. I'm very pleased and honored to be chairing this roundtable session in this inaugural edition of our Heritage Thursdays, the webinar series from Our Common Dignity Initiative, Rights-Based Approaches. We have heard so far the philosophical thoughts from the ICOMOS president to the founding principles of this particular working group, the works we have done so far, and the outcomes and the way forward. Now, this roundtable will look into 2 important perspectives. One is on the policy side of it and the guidelines. The second is kind of a case, what we are doing. And our own members from this working group are presenting. So without any further delay, let me invite Brené, Benedicte, and Ave for the first case study for this roundtable. It is on the people-centered policy and operational guidelines. So floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. When this working group started its work back in 2010, 2011, there were a couple of critical voices indicating that ICOMOS was mainly concerned with material conservation. Now, the reality is a little bit more nuanced than that. Let me illustrate this with some examples. Next slide, please. I will give my presentation in French, but from time to time switch to English. And let us go back to even 1931 with the Athens Charter. Cette charte reconnaissait déjà à l'époque que la meilleure garantie de conservation des monuments et œuvres d'art leur vient du respect et de l'attachement des peuples eux-mêmes. So in other words, give me a public opinion and I will develop you a policy, became one of the fundamental approaches that ICOMOS founding fathers used as well. Mais l'importance de l'éducation s'est également retrouvée dans les travaux de l'ICOMOS. Lorsque nous, un deuxième principe, c'est la nécessité de comprendre ses racines pour construire un avenir. C'est de favoriser à travers la culture et la connaissance de la culture, la compréhension mutuelle pour ainsi contribuer à la paix. Dans les années 50 et 60, 70, il y avait des grands projets de développement qui menaçaient le patrimoine et les centres historiques un peu partout dans le monde. Or, le patrimoine culturel, troisième élément, fait partie de notre cadre de vie. Et notre environnement quotidien doit être un environnement de qualité. C'était des principes essentiels que les fondateurs de l'ICOMOS développaient. Et ils ont même influencé le principe de la conservation intégrée en 1975, dans l'année européenne du patrimoine, qui demande que la conservation du patrimoine ne soit pas uniquement intégrée dans l'aménagement du territoire, mais qui attire l'attention sur sa dimension sociale. Et évidemment, le patrimoine culturel ne se limite pas uniquement au patrimoine mondial. Des références aux personnes, aux communautés, aux valeurs, au développement, à la dimension sociale, on les trouve à travers toutes les chartes et tous les textes normatifs qu'a développé ICOMOS au fil des années. Mais il est vrai, nous ne trouvons pas de références très explicites, du moins pas dans la première partie, au texte, à la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme, ou encore un jargon des droits de l'homme. Et c'est assez normal parce que finalement, l'ICOMOS n'est pas une organisation des droits de l'homme, c'est une organisation qui rassemble des membres et qui s'occupe du patrimoine. Next slide, please. Néanmoins, nous constatons qu'il y a des changements notables dans les chartes et les autres textes internationaux. D'une part, nous sommes partis du droit du patrimoine au droit au patrimoine. Il y a aussi le principe que le droit au patrimoine implique le respect du patrimoine des autres. Il y a la reconnaissance du rôle des communautés. Enfin, nous constatons, et certains d'entre vous ont reconnu des principes qui sont aussi inclus dans la charte dans la convention cadre de Faro, toujours est-il que nous sommes passés de références implicites à des références plus explicites et, pourquoi pas, à une utilisation du jargon des droits humains. Prochaine, next slide, please. Et voici, pour rappel, quelques documents clés de l'ICOMOS et aussi quelques expressions à retenir, mais vous les avez déjà entendues dans les présentations précédentes, notamment de la part de notre présidente Teresa Patricio, de Bent et de Have. Premièrement, il y avait la déclaration de Stockholm et celle de Buenos Aires, qui ont marqué le 50e et le 70e anniversaire de la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme. Et déjà, la déclaration de Stockholm soulignait le droit au patrimoine. Il y a eu ensuite aussi les principes éthiques de l'ICOMOS qui ont été adoptés en 2014 et sa révision récente en 2020 qui a donné lieu à un renforcement de cette reconnaissance des droits de l'homme et des approches fondées sur les droits. Alors, l'objectif est tout de même de se familiariser avec ce jargon des droits de l'homme. Vous avez déjà entendu une référence au Free, Prior and Informed Consent, en français le consentement préalable, libre et éclairé, mais il y a d'autres expressions avec lesquelles il faudra se familiariser, comme notamment le droit d'identifier, d'avoir accès au patrimoine culturel et d'en jouir, qui viendront en plus de sa conservation. Donc, en conclusion, Certes, l'ICOMOS a toujours eu une approche humanistique. ICOMOS has always had a humanistic and a people-centered approach, absolutely. And we should not forget that we stand on the shoulders of so many people who came before us, like Bento reminded us. However, rights-based approaches show new ways to go about it. Next slide, and I hand the floor over to Ava.
Yes, as Benedict pointed out, it is about power, it is about heritage, it is about community, and it is about government of the heritage. And so I will briefly, very briefly, 5 minutes, talk about the latest policy documents that we are proud that heritage communities and these issues and their empowerment is explicitly written in. As Teresa pointed out, in 2019, we contributed to the revision of the operational guidelines during the 33rd World Heritage Congress in Baku. The revised operational guidelines encourage state parties to adopt a human rights-based approach. In the revised guidelines, some general principles of participation of local communities and other rights holders, as well as duties of stakeholders, are explicitly mentioned. In the 19 revised guidelines, operational guidelines encourage state parties to adopt a human rights-based approach through Part B, Article 12, 14, 46, 111, and 117. It should be echoed in heritage impact assessments as well, and it will is echoed in the heritage impact assessment that is currently under publication. In 2019-20, next slide, please. We prepared inputs related to operational guidelines is a World Heritage Impact Assessment guidance, and that is another very relevant policy document. And we made there some inputs highlighting the role of heritage communities explicitly stated in the amended World Heritage Operational Guidelines. Sustainable development should include principles to enhance the life and well-being of communities concerned, and intangible aspects include communities maintaining tradition and cultural continuity, and local communities' rights and participation in the decision-making process should be highlighted separately, and the assessment of the process of heritage impact should be transparent and should take place in consultation with stakeholders, in particular with traditional owners and other associated people. And they should be part of the decision-making process, giving free, prior, informed consent in relevant matters. And the management plan should include plan of ecological and culturally sustainable enhancement of the quality of life and well-being of communities concerned, as well as their effective and equitable participation in the management, as explicitly stated in the operational guidelines in Baku. So it is really a strong movement there. And as to the 2020 documents, in a response to protecting human rights during and after COVID-19, we recommended a longer-term equitable transformation to sustainable models which might uphold the rights and dignity of cultural communities. And further, we pointed the ICOMOS post-COVID-19 ambition that the crisis becomes an agent for positive change. And this report was published, and ICOMOS has made contributions to United Nations Special Report on Cultural Rights and Climate Change in close cooperation with several working groups. And in the report, Mrs. Karima Benoun mentioned ICOMOS contribution. ICOMOS is referred in the paragraph 18, 28, 29, 40, 35, 41, 67, 69, 81 of the report, all relevant to the topic under discussion. Just to point out some of our contribution highlighting the role of local communities, traditional knowledge and nature use. Culture is closely connected to ecosystem, especially for indigenous peoples, rural and traditional population. Both cultures and the environment are often place-based. Concern for the welfare of future generation is already explicitly environmental. It should also be cultural. Some cultural heritage places are the sole providers of work or food, and therefore they are essential to the survival of community. When such places are at risk, the survival of associated communities is threatened. Future generations will inherit these losses as their connections to the past, to place and to practices are stolen from them by choices made today. Therefore, an environmentally conscious human rights approach to all aspects of heritage is essential. And further, cultural heritage, traditional knowledge and creativity are climate assets and should be recognized as such. And 81, to implement cultural rights and safeguard culture, we should adopt the human rights-based global action plan to save the cultures of humanity and protect cultural rights from the climate emergency, driven by local priorities and concerns, and prioritize the need for an especially urgent, effective and concerted global effort to prevent the cultural extinction of population facing particular threats from the climate emergency. Polar coastal regions, including indigenous peoples and those living in small island states, as well as take cultural rights and cultural impacts into consideration in responding to all aspects of climate change and climate action. And that is something that is driven by the same concerns. And next slide, please. Finally, yes, resolution of people-centered approaches to cultural heritage is our cooperative work, and we have mentioned that already. What we are focusing now is that the next triennium will be devoted to implementing the people-centered approach and the resilience of heritage community facing climate change, and we continue our work on that perspective. So, but Gronia, please.
Thank you, Ave, and maybe Paulette, you could move to the next slide. I'm going to really try and maybe be quite simple in my 3 slides and my contribution. And when we were preparing for this roundtable discussion, we thought about ourselves as members of ICOMOS, which infers an expert competency in the sphere of cultural heritage. So in a way, it's maybe just to think about the principles or the concepts of what competency means, either as practitioners or policymakers, but primarily in our position as members of ICOMOS. And I've just put down 4 of these concepts here. There are probably others, and I'm very interested in the chat or the questions if people have other thoughts. But awareness is so fundamental, and sometimes we can forget the simple and the basic. But in our day-to-day involvement and engagement in cultural heritage, to be aware, the first instance, is very fundamental. The understanding, I suppose, between awareness and understanding might come knowledge, and then to understand. And I think as one starts to advance in terms of the levels of competency, you begin to realize that as ICOMOS is a multidisciplinary organization, not everyone is an expert in everything. And our breadth of expertise needs to perhaps expand. And that sometimes the expertise is on the ground, or is a level of competency that we need to include or engage to enable our ability to be involved positively to advance. So if we move from the idea of people-centered approaches to perhaps more law-based, rights-based approaches, ability may be something that might vary from member to member. And I suppose the other really, really important aspect which we encounter is this concept of continuing professional development or lifelong learning. We never stop learning. And it's one of the things I will happily say, I am not an expert on rights-based approaches, but I am learning so much through my engagement with the working group. And I don't think that will ever end. Next slide, please.
You may want to wrap up in 1 minute.
Lovely, thank you. I'll be fast, Neil. Next slide, Paulette. So just, it's been said a few times, what is the working group doing to assist and enable the membership competency? The training workshops from 2016 in Norway, in South Africa, India, Estonia, and this year also in Estonia and in the LAC countries. So the geographical spread is important. Case studies, gathering case studies, but the training workshops allow for teasing out sometimes and discussing sensitive case studies, which is also about advancing our knowledge. And then the Heritage Thursdays initiative, today's launch, an opportunity for conversation, for debate, for dialogue. And then Neil or Paulette, my last slide, please. And again, just to end on a simple note, perhaps, but the maybe some profound aspects to the principles and application in practice behind people-centered approaches or rights-based approaches, that we work collaboratively and inclusively, that often it's about relationships, the making of them, the building of them, and indeed the maintaining of them. They're not one-off, they're often lifelong as well. Concept of mutual respect is so fundamental, even when you may disagree, to stand in somebody else's shoes and to understand their perspective. And then listening, which is a two-way dialogue also. And Ave mentioned very importantly also the ability to empower. So thank you, and I'll hand back to Neil.
Thank you very much. Again, wonderfully presented overview of what we have done in the policy and guidelines and how this has been translated into building capacities among our membership, but also beyond. Now let's move on to the second case study, which is a case from reflections from Latin America in terms of training and other case studies. So I invite Adriana to take it forward.
Thank you, Neil. As Groni mentioned, we did a training course last year in Latin America region, that is Latin America and the Caribbean. And so we did it by Zoom because we thought of doing it in physical, but with the COVID context, we couldn't. So we did it in Zoom, so we have to change a lot of our original plans. We did it along with another colleague, Eduardo Romero, and Jacqueline Custodio, that during a week. And the results, I'm going to show it today, two cases of the webinar. The first one I would like to mention is Cais do Balongo. Next slide, please. Cais do Balongo in Brazil. That is, this is a World Heritage Site, archaeological site. Next slide, please. Is in Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil. Next one, please, which see it on the map. This archaeological site is composed of the remains of the old stone pier built in 1811 for the disembarkation of enslaved Africans in the port of Rio de Janeiro, and the one built in 1843 to receive the Napoleon Princess Teresa Cristina de Bourbon, wife of the Emperor Don Pedro II. Next slide, please. It was inscribed under the Criterion 3 that says that present a unique or at least exceptional testimony of a vanished cultural tradition or civilization, because nearly a quarter of all enslaved Africans in America arrived in Rio de Janeiro between 16th and 19th centuries, making the city the largest slave port in history, revealed by the archaeological excavations carried out in 2011. The Balongo Pier took the symbolic value of material testimony of African roots in the Americas and constitutes one of those spaces in which materiality is condensed in living memory. Next one, please. Also, it was inscribed under Criterion 6 being directly or materially associated with living events and traditions, ideas of belief, artistic and literary works of exceptional universal significance. The trafficking of enslaved Africans is a long-lasting story understood as part of the so-called sensitive issues which awaken the memory of traumatic and painful events and deal with historical episodes and processes of human rights violations. That is, Valongo Pier presents itself as an example of a sensitive historical site. In its surroundings were the warehouses in which the newly arrived captives were exhibited and sold, the lazaretto where the sick of the horrible trip were treated, and the Black New Cemetery, the destination of those who died when they arrived. It is the most striking place of memory in the African diaspora outside the African continent. Next one, please. The trafficking of enslaved Africans is considered the greatest forced migration process in the history of mankind, and its content of pain and tragedy makes Valongo Pier a history site of sensitive memory. It is located in a region in which the African presence has left a living heritage, which is perpetuated and renewed until today. It therefore expresses the resistance and affirmation of Afro-descendant communities in the Americas. Objects found in excavation of the archaeological site reveal the plurality of African matrices brought to the New World and the ability of the enslaved to express their identity marks while reinventing them in captivity. Valongo exudes oppression, racism, intolerance, inequality, and marginality at the limit. It evokes a heavy and oppressive past, the consequences of which are still felt today and felt for a long time in Brazil. For this reason, impregnated with the sense of place, it certainly stimulates reflection and inspires social awareness, which favors its transformation into a space for civic engagement and dialogue. As Tania Andrea Lima said, in our view, their strength and symbolic power can be placed at the service of the causes of Black militancy against social, political, economic inequality, as well as political activism that fights for the most fundamental human rights and respect for ethnic diversity. Next one, please. In the site, they were found more than 1 million pieces that represent customs, daily life, religious symbolism. Next one, please. As you can see, some sample of the pieces that they were found. Next one, please. The archaeological site is seen as a radiating center for citizenship. Next one, please. Numerous commercial, cultural, and religious activities, including capoeira, circles, and the symbolic washing of caves, take it as a background for the first day in July. This slide shows the washing of the pier in July. Next one, please. This one shows the capoeira dance that is dancing in circle, that is a symbolic dance and religious dance. Next one, please. The rediscovery of Caves do Valongo motivate an intense debate which mobilized public managers, community, and academic leaders. The United Nations has instituted the period from January 2015 to December 2024 as the decade of people of African descent. Next one, please. As a site of memory, represents the resistance capacity of the Black population that is in surroundings, lived and continues to live, and that assumes it as a symbolic space of cultural affirmation. Next case I would like to present is ESMA. Next slide, please. ESMA is, we moved to another country in South America, is in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, is the Mechanic School of Navy. Next one, please. ESMA was a clandestine center for detention, torture, and extermination as a place where people were illegally detained, tortured, and murdered with a relative new repression technique called enforced disappearance of persons. Approximately 5,000 men and women lost their lives here between, next one please, 1976 and 1983. They were political activists, union members, students, journalists, relatives of the victims, and many others. The women that were pregnant were kept alive until they gave birth, and after that the newborn babies were given to selected families of the military and the mothers were killed. What you see on the left are the premises of what was known as the Mechanic School of the Navy, ESMA, in Spanish, Escuela Mecánica de la Armada, for the acronym ESMA. This place has 42 acres and more than 30 buildings in a residential neighborhood. It was founded as a prestigious education center that provide academic training to the officers of the Navy and professional training to the non-commissioned officers. All the craftsmanship necessary to manage and maintain war and naval ships was taught there. Next one, please. In 2007, the ESMA was transformed in the space of memory for the promotion and defense for human rights, where now are located state institutions and civil associations related to this goal. The space for memory is managed by a special bureaucratic structure where human rights organizations have veto power. In 2008, the place was declared historical location and the building of the officer quarters historical monument. There is plenty of evidence about the history of the ESMA and of the clandestine center. The basic sources are the testimonies of the survivors before the courts of law and the physical evidence in the places where the crimes were committed. The building of the officer quarters was vacated by the Navy in 2004 after the government, with the support of human rights organizations, decided to transform all the premises of the ESMA in a space of memory. At that time, the building was complete and had inscriptions, marks, and constructive layers that have been validated as authentic in the courts of law and were sufficient enough to explain its historical and constructive evolution. In the 70s, many governments of Latin America created a form of illegal repression that was based on the enforced disappearance of people. This way of doing things was coordinated between Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina through a common plan named Plan Condor. Argentina was the country in which the enforced disappearance of persons was applied at a greater scale. There were more than 700 clandestine centers distributed through all the Argentine territory. ESMA was the best known in many countries and was often cited as the testimony of a symbol of the state terrorism based on the enforced disappearance of persons. Next one, please. This dark history of horror and suffering has also a positive outcome. And this is another feature crucial for interpretation. From the days of the dictatorship, the human rights organization committed themselves to denounce what was happening, as the form of legal repression chosen was not known by the international institution. It was necessary to explain and give trustful information and to design new legal measures. The United Nations took note from all this and created the work group of enforced disappearance in 1980, made a declaration for the protection of all persons from enforced disappearance in 1992, and finally implemented in 2006, the Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. Next one, please. The Special Commission visits the former ESMA clandestine center in 1984. Next one, please. The creation of the ESMA Museum and Site of Memory was in 2015. Next one, please. ESMA Museum and Site Memory is also a testimony and a symbol of the power of persuasion and social consensus as a means of obtaining justice. This point of view is now shared by the varied political spectrum that represents more than 98% of the electorate. To elaborate the project of the ESMA Museum and Site of Memory, they have 3 restrictions. The first one was the condition of legal evidence of the building. Because of this, the project has to be approved by the judge who was in charge of the protection of the place. The second restriction was the declaration of historical monument that was related to a special protocol of conservation and maintenance. And the third restriction had to do with the survivors, the relatives of the victims, the human rights organization, and many other stakeholders. This last point is essential when you deal with traumatic memories because the subject is always very sensitive and you don't want to promote harsh debates and useless confrontations. While it is not necessary to reach unanimity, it's always important to be open to dialogue and to promote social consensus. Because of this, the original project was presented to more than 200 groups of stakeholders and modified on many occasions in order to incorporate their suggestions. This was the case, for example, with the entrance, next one please, of the ESMA.
Adriana, you may want to wrap up.
Okay, and site of memory. Next one, please. This was the entrance of the museum and have to be changed because the mother of one of the survivors didn't want to be inside the picture of his dead daughter. This is a clear example that how a site of memory can turn into a learning space of nunca más, and never again, this kind of persecution and physical disappearance. So the space has minimal intervention, is the building, but with strong messages just to build. Next one and final one, please. To bear in mind, the next one, thank you. To bear in mind that the first thing is to have, like the UNESCO preamble of the Constitution said, to bear in mind the peace must be constructed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adriana. That was wonderful. There have been some questions, but I think questions are also being answered on the way. So we are in a very good dialogue here. But I still repeat the question. And if there are any other questions, please type it out in the chat box. The question was about the capacity building. So when we say the capacity building, so do we also think of an approach based on capacity, which are already existing on the site with the communities? So that was a question from Amelia Rose. So I would ask the first group to ponder upon that. Ave had already acknowledged that, but if you have additional thoughts on that question.
Groja, perhaps you can elaborate on that because you didn't have time much.
Yeah, well, I'm agreeing very much with your answer, Ave, about the two-way communication, and but I suppose again it's another different type of understanding. Spending the time to know what the existing capacity is in a place, and with the community that you're working with, or in whatever situation it might be, and I think this is where I suppose that question brings together the principles in the people-centered approaches resolution between addressing climate change, where we have so much knowledge to learn from communities on the ground who understand their place so much better, and also should have a very strong say in how they may be adapted or altered in the agenda of climate change, but where that marries with the rights-based approaches working group. So I think we would agree. And I think that's a really valid point, Emily. So thank you for raising that. I don't know if Benedict has anything more to say, or Bente. or anyone on the panel.
Perhaps, Benedict, you mentioned that it has developed via resolutions and in time, this attitude towards experts and people. So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe I should have been a little bit more explicit about that myself. Indeed, there is a shift from education to participation. That's very clear in all the text. You see it, whether it's ICOMOS text or international conventions, you will always find at the end an article about education and about documentation. But nowadays, we speak much more about participation and about learning it goes in the two directions, like Gronya said. You learn as much as, let's say, as the experts that we are from the people, from the communities, then the other way around. It's really a dialogue. That is what it makes it also so fascinating and a win-win for everybody.
Right, and to the benefit of the other audience who might not have seen the question was about how can we or shall we incorporate the local knowledges, local resources that are already with the community in the capacity building that we're talking in this context. So that's why Ave said it's a two-way process. Bente, yeah, please go ahead. You have raised your hand. Otherwise, I would come back to Adriana also to reflect on this point with reference to your cases, whether this two-way dialogue, how was it happening, or what are the challenges, if at all you have. But Bente first, yeah.
Yeah, I like to ask Emily what she means by capacity approach, because to me when we have the people-centered approach, it's about being on the shoulder of the people who are living there, who have their skills and who come with all their know-how. So people-centered approach is about the capacity of the people. So could you please enlighten me on what are your thoughts on capacity based approach?
Yeah, Emily, for the interest of time, you might just unmute yourself and speak up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I have a screaming baby behind me, but I'll try to speak.
Lovely.
Yeah, it's just a matter of, I guess, language, the idea of capacity building versus capacity based. I think it's also, Benedict, you mentioned the participation. So like also just at what point is participation enacted? I think is also an important point. At what point the community is involved in that participation. So sometimes like in education, it's sort of at the end, but capacity based is really from the beginning. So just thinking about too, like how participation is really implemented and at what point in the process are people actually participating. So I think this capacity based is really emphasizing that the people are in it from the beginning. So yes, I agree, people-centered from what I've read. It is, of course, it's centering people in that it is about their capacity, but just, I think that using the language capacity building versus capacity based is just slightly different.
Thank you, Emily. I think that's a great point. Adriana, do you have to add anything to this conversation?
I'm going to talk from the cases I presented. I think there are two words that are magic, that are empathy and listening. Because not always in human rights approaches, we get consensus. So we have to be very careful and we have to be empathetic with the one that we are trying to work with or try to, is a question of more than respect, is empathy. And listening because of the needs and what is happening in the communities. We talk about a lot about communities. The thing is that we are working for the communities or from the communities. How are we working? In the case of Cais do Balongo in Brazil, it's very important to see, to visualize the slaves that there were for many years that were invisible in the society until now, we can say. So through the culture, through the manifestations, it's a way of giving and recognize the human rights. And not always we are going to get the consensus, but it's a question of education, because education in the sense of knowledge, in the sense of not to teach, but to know what are the things were and the different approaches. That's one thing. And in the case of ESMA, I would like to emphasize one example, that when they were doing this resolution to the creation of the museum, it was in Spanish, we have pronouns like in French, le, la, el, la, but we don't have that in English, so I have to explain linguistically. So in the when they did this this declaration of the museum, they put all in masculine, not taking into account the feminine. So one survivor just visiting all the display in the museum says, this is not a question, you are not respecting the gender. So it comes from the people that say, you are not doing a good job. So my point is that the knowledge is everywhere. So we have to respect the knowledge. Sometimes we forget. In the academic, we forget that. In this group, we don't forget because we're inclusive, we are respectful and all that, we're marvelous. But the thing is that we have to take that into account every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. Thank you. Thank you. I think this is wonderful conversation, but I'm worried about the time. So I will just take a comment from Dinu Bumbaru, which is really important, I think. He mentions that there seems to be that there is a focus, the focus seems to be on improving dialogue capacity. And he suggests, how about trilogue, meaning heritage defender, regulator, and investor or user, or tetralogue, even if you add the honor. So the honor, protector, defender, and user. I think that's a very good question for us to reflect. His comment is there is a limit to improving dual dialogue, especially as we move towards an ecosystem or actors and values in heritage. So that's a good comment I would like to just highlight here. And then there is another question, which I don't think we have time to go into it, but we might want to keep it in mind. If we could also think about the collaboration processes with local authorities in these learning and participation processes for the creation of local policies. So I think these are, again, the processes, how do we engage with communities? How do we really implement the people-centered approaches in reality? So I think this is revolving around that. Unfortunately, the time given to me for the roundtable is over. So I would like to thank the panelists and thank you also participants for the wonderful questions. And I will invite Ave to take it forward. Thank you very much. And apologies for not being able to take all the questions at this point. Thank you.
Perhaps, thank you. Perhaps all the questions were actually about, and we can wrap it up in the sense that I will give floor to Bente, and she can tell that it is about rights when there are equal partners, heritage owners, that means local communities. That is the partnerships that experts are not superior, but both have their rights. But Bente can wrap now up these themes. So together with Alicia, as I recall, so you have a dialogue of ending the session. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much for challenging us. And the last challenge from Dino here, I think is important because it is about people-centered approaches. We said that we stand on the shoulders on ICOMOS and people who have acted before us, as Teresa showed in her approach, showing the ICOMOS from a rights perspective. I think that it is important to keep in mind that to maintain a living heritage, we have to understand that it's not just some statement that we're standing on the shoulders of the people who have created the cultural heritage, which we should protect. It is we depend on them to sustain a living heritage, and that is why we need, as Dino said, the trialogue, and we need the different parties. We need the diversity. So this is a continued discussion. It starts now, and we need to challenge each other in these questions and to ask each other the questions, like when Emily said about the capacity approach, what do you mean by that? So we need to have this sometimes this very, very simple dialogue with people to understand what is in their mind, and to also try to be more clear with our thoughts and explore them, and and get out from our expert cabinet. So I thank you very much for all the important inputs, and I will looking forward to continue the dialogue in the Heritage Thursdays. And the next one will be with Alicia with gender. And to wrap up, Alicia, please invite us to the next Heritage Thursday.
Thank you very much, Bente and colleagues, to the opportunity. If I may, I would like to speak in Spanish a little to introduce the next webinar, because the main language will be Spanish. Pues lo que estaba comentando, que se nos olvidó antes, cuando las compañeras presentábamos la mesa, deciros que el siguiente seminario, el siguiente webinario, que va a tratar el tema del género y las mujeres, bueno, de género, perdón, y el patrimonio cultural, también las mujeres, por supuesto, y queríamos también con esto aclarar que queremos ser inclusivos y que no sea siempre solo el uso de una lengua principal, como el inglés, el francés o otra, sino que podamos tener diversas lenguas en estas mesas redondas. Por supuesto, siempre tendremos el gentil apoyo del grupo de comunicación, de nuestro grupo de trabajo, y habrá siempre la posibilidad de la traducción al inglés o a otras lenguas a través de este importante soporte que nos da el grupo. Así que nada más, daros las gracias y que os espero ver en el próximo jueves, que si no me equivoco es el 25 de junio, y en el que espero podamos debatir intensamente sobre los temas de género y patrimonio cultural, y que sea una buena aportación. Concretamente el 24 de junio. Muchas gracias, thank you very much, and nothing else.
Thank you all. We are just right on time, so bye everyone.
Bye bye.
And see you in June.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.